16 starts and sits, 2 starts, 2 sits, each position before week 10 so that you can lock in that dub down the stretch. Ty, why don't you kick us off with your quarterback start of the week?
Sam Darnold. We are going back to the well on this one, and he's been pretty solid since the Vikings bye week. He's been the quarterback 10, the QB 12 in points per game. It's technically the QB 13 because Marcus Mariota played a game, but I'm not really including just a one game from Marcus Mariota in that one. Sam Darnold has been great lately, and he has a great matchup this week against Jacksonville. They are the highest in EPA per pass attempt, giving up the most passing touchdowns on the year, second most yards per game. I really don't think this needs to be over-explained. It's not complicated. Sam Darnold has been performing. He gets a good matchup. You can definitely lock him into your lineup.
Yeah, other than that Jets game, the dude's been balling. 19 fantasy points a game. If you take that one out, obviously you have to include it. But that was his only down week. And now, like you said, he gets Jacksonville, who is maybe the worst pass defense in the NFL right now. Baltimore's close, but the reason they're close is because their run defense is really good. So teams only have one option but to throw. Jacksonville doesn't have a good run defense or a good pass defense. So teams are really just taking advantage of them. I completely agree with that one. I love Sam Darnold in this matchup. I'm taking the worst team, or the quarterback that's playing the worst team in fantasy points allowed right now. And I'm taking Brock Purdy against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Purdy over his last 3 games, 23, 20, 26 fantasy points per game, averaging 23 a game over that stretch. Christian McCaffrey should be back in this one. And I know you might think at first, oh no, he's going to, they're going to run the ball a lot more. San Francisco's been running the ball a ton, let me tell you. Right? They haven't gotten away from that. If anything, Christian McCaffrey being back is going to open up the field more down the field. And Christian McCaffrey gets a lot of receptions. I don't know if you knew that. I don't know if that's a surprise to you, but that's a big part of his game. I think he helps him out in that. And like I said, Tampa Bay allowing the most fantasy points to quarterbacks at 23.6 per game. There are only 2 quarterbacks right now averaging 23 fantasy points per game. It's Baker Mayfield and Lamar Jackson. So he would be in pretty good company if he just hits what they're averaging. I really like Brock Purdy coming off the bye.
Yeah, I do too. One of his wide receivers happens to be one of my starts of the week, and we'll talk about him later. But, Brock hasn't had more. He's only had 2 games with multiple passing touchdowns. That was against Seattle, and that was against the LA Rams. He threw 3 in those games, and every other game it's 0 or 1. I think this is a game where he's going to throw multiple touchdowns just because this Tampa defense is not, the Kansas City defense of the world, if that helps draw a comparison there. So, yeah, Brock Purdy coming off of the bye week. This offense is at as full strength as they can get without Brandon Ayuk, right, with Christian McCaffrey coming back. Yeah, I absolutely love Brock Purdy as well this week.
Yeah, and I think that brings up a good point, too. Like you said, he's only had multiple touchdowns in 2 of 8 weeks so far, yet he's only had 1 game under 15 fantasy points. So, right, if we're talking a floor, too, he's got a relatively high floor going into this week. Our sits, we actually both took 2 rookie quarterbacks in this one. So why don't you start us off with your sit of the week?
Yeah, I'm not really sure. I think most people were going to sit these guys, but let this be a vote of confidence. Bo Nix is not a startable option this week. We kind of talked him up as a startable option last week against Baltimore, and he didn't necessarily have a bad game, but it wasn't also a great game either. I think it was only 17 fantasy points on the week. 23, 21, 14, and 29 in the 4 games before that. Now he gets Kansas City. So I think we're going to see something closer to the 14 and 17 than the 23, 21, and 29, right? Kansas City is allowing the 6th fewest passing yards per game the last 2 weeks. So you're essentially just banking on the rushing production of Bo Nix, which he can come through there. He's shown that in multiple weeks so far this year. But it's too inconsistent for me, where he can have some games where he's putting it up over 60 rushing yards, and the very next week it's closer to like 10. So it's too inconsistent for me to have enough faith in him to put him in my lineups this week.
I mean, Bo Nix, to be fair, quarterback 8 on the season, quarterback 5 in points per game since week 5, averaging 21.5. So He's been a good starter. Like you said, I think people are considering at this point, if you've had an Anthony Richardson, if you've got a Kirk Cousins, if you've got a Tua, starting him. But like you said, I wouldn't start quarterbacks against Kansas City unless they've been, Lamar Jackson or Baker Mayfield. Like I would stay away otherwise. And I agree. Divisional matchup, I just don't want a lot to do with that. Speaking of guys who've kind of been on a run lately, Drake May is another. Ooh, wait, I lied. Ty, you wanted that one back. You asked for it. You asked for it. I
did.
told Ty in our chat to let me know if he wants it back. I read his message and I went, nah. So I'll give it back to you, though. I'll give it back to you.
No, you mentioned Baker and Lamar as like the only two quarterbacks that you would feel comfortable starting, besides like again Jalen Hurts and Josh Allen, right? Like Baker Mayfield literally just played Kansas City the past week and just threw for 200 yards and 2 touchdowns.
Yeah.
So it was a down game for Baker, which that's a compliment to Baker that a down game is 200 yards and 2 touchdowns. But again, that being said, if that's what you could get out of Baker, Bo Nix is going to struggle a bit in this one.
No, for sure. Now I get to talk about. I was just so excited to talk about my guy. It's Drake May, and I've actually been a real big fan of Drake May so far this season. He's been the quarterback 9 since he started in week 6. We've seen a couple big games from him here and there. Last week he did it on the ground, putting up 17. We've seen 21 against Houston, 20 against Jacksonville. But I'm here to tell you, I do not like this matchup against Chicago. Chicago has allowed the least amount of fantasy points to quarterbacks so far this season. They're playing in Chicago where they're expecting 20-mile-an-hour winds. Now, obviously, that's not like crazy or anything. I'm not right. It's not going to be a monsoon, but it's just enough playing outdoors, a little bit colder weather that I'm just shying away in a tough matchup from Drake May. I mean, not a great O-line. I think Chicago rattles them a little bit. We saw them really slow down Jaden Daniels a couple weeks ago. So, yeah, I'm staying away from Drake May as well.
Yeah, we've definitely come back down a little bit from the QB 10 and QB 7 finishes that he had back in week 6 and week 7. And over the past 2 weeks, it's been 11.5. And granted, he only played part of the game against the Jets because he had a concussion, I believe it was.
Yes.
And then he played Tennessee. And I have to say this partially because I was a victim of this happening, because I've went up against Ramondre Stevenson. I lost by 3 fantasy points in my matchup. You know exactly who you are if you're listening, because it's our good buddy Jackson. So that last second touchdown to Ramondre really did save his week, because without that touchdown, he would have been at 13. So again, Houston and Jacksonville were his better games. The Jets, the Titans, and now the Bears. I think you can draw the conclusion that the Bears matchup is probably closer to the Jets and Titans in terms of passing production than Houston and Jacksonville.
Yeah, I mean, if we're just like, Kirk Cousins is a guy I'd like to start over both of them against the Saints. No Marshawn Lattimore. So if you're like, I think that's might be a common one that people have, is in that kind of situation where you got Kirk or one of these guys, you're thinking about it. I'm sticking with Kirk. Before we hit to running backs, real quick, I'm going to keep this super fast. I know you're sick of the political ads. This is a political ad, but I know you've heard it a lot. We're talking to the 93% of you who need to subscribe to our channel. What a transition. Who need to subscribe to our channel. Just move that mouse a little bit, hit that click. You'll get all of our content. We love you. If you're on the audio podcast, we love you as well. Drop us a like, drop us a comment, or just let us know how we're doing if you enjoyed it all. But yeah, that's all I got to say about that. Ty wants to talk about his running back start, and I don't blame him because I really like this guy. So Ty, why don't you take it away here?
Yeah, Aaron Jones. So I've got 2 Vikings, Sam Darnold and Aaron Jones, as my starts of the week. And this is a name that I think everyone was already planning on starting, which I think is very correct. You should be playing Aaron Jones this year. He has not shown you at all this year a reason to not play him. You know, he got hurt against the Jets, and that was the only thing. You have no way of predicting that. Again, because of these bye weeks, it's really slim pickings when it comes to running backs this week. There are a lot of running backs with bad matchups. Aaron Jones could have a top 10 finish this week with Jacksonville, right? They're allowing the 10th highest EPA per rush, 6th most rushing touchdowns. So even if it's not the most efficient game from Aaron Jones on the ground, he's involved in the receiving game enough that it is a contributing factor to a good finish for him. And if the Vikings are going to put up points, Aaron Jones is going to have a hand in that as well. He's averaging 21 touches a game since the week 6 bye, as well as almost 100 total yards per game as well. Aaron Jones, again, you were already starting him, but I'm just here to tell you, continue to keep the faith with Aaron Jones. He's been producing and coming through for you this year. That does not change this week.
All righty, let's say you got a pretty decent team right now, and you're looking guys around Aaron Jones finish wise. DeAndre Swift or against the Patriots or Aaron Jones this week?
If you want the floor, I would say Jones, but if you're going ceiling, I would probably say Swift.
All right. Let's see. Chuba Hubbard with Jonathan Brooks coming back. Who are you going there?
Oh, Aaron Jones for sure. It's not so much Jonathan Brooks coming back, but when it comes to it, it's just good offense versus bad offense.
For sure. Ramondre Stevenson or Aaron Jones?
Ramondre against Chicago, man. That's a tough one for me to sell Ramondre on to start over Aaron Jones. I would definitely stay with Aaron Jones there.
Yeah. So I mean, I think most people are on the same page as you there. And you know, I don't blame them. It's just like you said, a vote of confidence. Stick with them, keep them rolling in this game. My guy Tyrone Tracy, you know, a little bit of a more dirty name, but when you look at, no, I shouldn't say dirty. That sounded bad. Not dirty. I mean, I just mean like not as sexy of a name.
It's gross, is what you meant.
Yes, dirty was not what I meant at all. I meant gross when it comes to fantasy. But over the last 5 weeks, 18, 17, 6, 20, 16 carries. So he's getting the work. This is his backfield. He's only had one game under that with it during the stretch under 60% of snaps. Devin Singletary is not the same factor anymore. And his quarterback is Daniel Jones. The fact that Brian Daboll every single week has to come out when the week starts and go, Daniel Jones is still starting, should tell you everything you need to know about Daniel Jones. Andy Reid does not come out every single week and go, Patrick Mahomes is still starting, because nobody's wondering. But apparently there are a lot of people wondering if it's still Daniel Jones week. And then he gets to play Carolina in Germany. And Carolina is allowing the most points to running backs this season. I think they're just going to feed him the ball a ton. And I think they're going to throw it to Malik Neighbors a ton. I think it's going to be these two that are going to feast. Obviously, you're starting Malik Neighbors. So I'm giving you the vote of confidence to start Tyrone Tracy in this one.
Yeah, Tyrone Tracy, it feels like ever since he really kind of took over this backfield, he's been kind of you don't feel great about playing him, but you still do because you know that he's going to get touches, right? This week, I think, is the reason why in my assumptions, Tyrone Tracy is a start of the week because there is a high ceiling this week. There is a high potential for a boom week, 5 big booms, if you want to say that, out of Tyrone Tracy this week going up against Carolina. Again, this is just a prime matchup for the guy. And it's not even that like he's only reliant on these good matchups. Like he ran for 145 against Pittsburgh in prime time on the road, right? Like the guy can do it really against everybody. It's just a matter of like, maybe it comes down to the Steelers' offensive line. If they can get a push, because Washington has been playing better on defense. The guy only had 66 yards and 16 carries. So, again, with Carolina this week, the ceiling is super high this week for the guy. Fire him up 1,000%.
Definitely. All right, let's move on to these running back sits. We got two guys that are kind of in committees right now, but have separated themselves, I want to say, to the starter role, and we just don't have the confidence in them. So why don't you start with your guy?
It's a bit of a purgatory, really, this week. Tank Bigsby, he was my sit last week going up against Philly. He's my sit again this week against Minnesota. Tank did outsnap ETN. Now ETN was coming off of the injury, so I'm not going to go as far to say like this is Tank's backfield that he's leading now. But the matchup against Minnesota is just not great. And now I'm realizing that 3 of my first 4 players are all in the same matchup. That's hilarious, by the way. Anyway, Minnesota has shown that they're not a complete like shutdown opponent to running backs, right? Just take a look at Detroit and take a look at the Rams. But Jacksonville is definitely closer to a team like Indianapolis, who Minnesota just held to around 3 yards a carry to their running backs, than Detroit and the Rams. So some people may be tempted to play Tank this week just because, again, the lead guy, he's going to get carries. I just don't trust it with this matchup. I don't trust it with ETN 2 weeks now removed from his injury, maybe having a bigger piece of the pie in this offense. I would stay away from Tank this week.
No, I agree with that. Tank doesn't get any receiving work either. So you even look at last week, ETN only had 5 touches, but Tank only was eight carries for 22 yards. That could very easily happen again. Blake Cashman should be back for the Vikings. He's been a big run stopper for them. So that
the Homer opinion, like the Vikings defense has not played well without Blake Cashman.
Yep.
So it may be even worse for Tank this week now that he can
no
be back.
100%. You also said you've had 3 of your first 3 guys all in the same game. 2 of my next 4 on the back half of this break are in that game as well. So we are pounding the Jacksonville Minnesota game, but there's a lot of fantasy talent in there. My guy, like I said, also in a committee a little bit is Rico Dowdle. And I think he's really pulled away as the clear star. Had, running back 8 last week with 20 fantasy points. But it sounds like Zeke should be back in some sort of role. And I think between him and Dalvin, they're going to chip into it just enough where it's going to be annoying. But on top of that, Dak Prescott is out. It's Cooper Rush at quarterback, and they're playing Philly. Philly's getting up the 5th fewest points to running backs. And if you don't think Philly is going to try and absolutely bury them with Cooper Rush out there, then I got some news for you. I think that Dallas is going to struggle mightily in this one. And I just really don't want their running back who, has been good in certain matchups, but overall is, I wouldn't call him a top 25 running back in the league right now.
No, for sure. Philly has been really, I shouldn't say really good. They have been, they have been the best team against the run since their bye week over the last 4 weeks. 73.5 rushing yards per game, the lowest in the league. 3.6 yards per carry. That is the 3rd lowest in the league. Philly is stopping the run no matter what. And now you take a beat up Dallas team, which, hey, Dak's not playing. CD may not even play as well because of his shoulder injury. So you take away the best weapon on Dallas's offense without the starting quarterback. Philly can just sell out to stop the run. And yeah, Rico should not be in your lineups this week. There is a lot working against him.
Exactly. And that's really what it comes down to. All righty, we're going to hear from our friends over at Underdog Fantasy before we come back with our wide receiver and tight end starts and sits.
Today's podcast episode is brought to you by our friends over at Underdog Fantasy. Now, we love Underdog. It is the easiest place to play best ball formats, and they even have their own form of player props called Pick'em. You can make up to 20 times your money on a single night by correlating props together. 2 picks will triple your money, 3 will 6 times it, 4 will 10 times it, and 5 plays that all hit will multiply your entry by 20. You can even place insurance on your picks too, so if only 4 of your 5 props hit, you still get 10 times your entry. And if you use our code FELLAS when signing up, Underdog is going to double your first deposit up to $100.
We are back, and we have our wide receiver starts, wide receiver sits, tight end starts, and tight end sits for you guys. And Ty, I will let you kick off with your wide receiver start.
It's Jauan Jennings. He was the wide receiver I was hinting at when Cam was talking about his QB start of the week in Brock Purdy. And this is a plus matchup for Jauan Jennings, right? If you thought it was good for Purdy, it is good for these San Francisco 49er wide receivers. Tampa's allowing the 8th most passing yards, / receiving yards per game. The last 2 weeks, they're tied for first in passing touchdowns allowed through the air. That's redundant. Passing touchdowns through the air. No, duh. In that same span. Just a reminder that Jauan Jennings in his one game without Debo and Ayuk this year, it was Debo specifically, Jennings popped off for 46.5 fantasy points. That's not going to happen again this week. So do not get your expectations, too high this week for Jennings. But the increased opportunity is big with Brandon Ayuk out of the picture now for the rest of the year. So I think you can start Jauan Jennings as a flex this week. Again, the wide receivers are taking the biggest hit with these bye weeks between the Packers and Seahawks specifically. So if you need a wide receiver and Jauan Jennings is available on your waivers somehow, I think he is definitely worth throwing in your flex this week.
Yeah. My only concern is just that Ricky Pearsall or one of these, other younger guys comes in. But like you said, Jauan Jennings has shown it before this season. They've used him already. He has, rapport with Brock Purdy. So I think they continue to use him. I think, like you said, I think he's a great flex option this week. My wide receiver start is very similar to your kind of running back start. I'm going with Brian Thomas. Most people have probably started him this week. I understand he kind of had a stinker last week. You might not have been the most happy with him coming out there. And what did he drop? 6.2 fantasy points against Philly. But I'm here to say against this Minnesota pass defense, who's given up the second most points to wide receivers, he is easily a start. He has the second highest yards per target in the NFL right now. But the biggest thing for me on Brian Thomas is he played 91% of snaps with no Christian Kirk last week. And he had yet to play over 79% going into that game. Jacksonville's just going to continue to use him more. Like you said, with Jauan Jennings is a plus matchup. So I'm trusting fully in Brian Thomas. I could see him finishing as a low-end wide receiver 1 this week.
I caught myself before I started talking. I was like, shoot, I'm on mute and I'm not about to make it 4 straight episodes in a row or 5 or whatever it is at this point. Yes, Brian Thomas is I think I have him ranked as a top 15 wide receiver this week. This Minnesota defense through the air is Swiss cheese, right? So if there was ever a week for Brian Thomas to really come through, it's this one. In this Minnesota defense as well, they were allowing some of the most explosive plays through the air as well this year. That fits right into Brian Thomas Jr., who's used all over the field, but he can make a 70-yard splash on any given play. So big fan of Brian Thomas Jr. I wanted him as my wide receiver start, but I said, I know that BTJ is more Cam's guy, and I said, yeah, I'll let him talk about him.
Yep. Thank you very much for that. And for those coming at home, that's our 4th player in the Minnesota-Jacksonville game. I'll swing it over to you for your wide receiver sit. I will give you guys a hint. There is no wide receiver sits from this matchup, so don't worry about it. You're not going to hear about a Jaguar or a Viking right now. But Ty, who is your wide receiver sit?
Well, funny you mentioned that because I'm throwing a curveball at you. It's actually Gabe Davis. Totally kidding. I have Deontay Johnson down as a sit. He did play just 30% of snaps last week, which was to be expected because John Harbaugh literally came out and said like he's not going to be playing much. But it's a short week for Baltimore going up against Cincinnati, and I don't think we're going to see a ton of Deontay just yet. Mm-hmm. He's going to be fighting for targets with Zay Flowers and Mark Andrews. Isaiah Likely is out of this matchup as well, so maybe they do need Deontay to step up. I just think there's too many question marks. There's too many what-if scenarios for me to really have confidence in Deontay, which is, sad because the guy, yes, he was in Carolina and it was gross, but at least like he was the only guy there. In any given week, he could give you double-digit targets. Those days are pretty much gone now, and I would bank on that not happening this week specifically on a short week.
Yeah, it's just tough to trust him after he's barely been there a full week now, and he didn't even practice that full week because he had a game in the middle of it. So I'm with you on that. It's just why take the risk because the reward's just not that great, right? Even with when you were starting Amari, you were like, oh, he could easily be the wide receiver 1 right now. Look great. With Deontay, it's like his ceiling is he's the wide receiver 2 on a team that doesn't throw the ball a lot. So yeah, I agree. I'm okay with sitting him. I'm sitting Calvin Ridley. I tried to make him my start of the week, chase the volume last week, and I was like, hey, you know what? We're going to try this. Yeah, no, I'm just saying stay away. And, you know, we've talked about a lot with Calvin Ridley, the quarterback play, like that's understood. But for me, what's on top of that is he's playing the Chargers. And this Chargers defense is good. Best EPA of any defense this year, both run and pass. They're allowing the 5th most fantasy points to wide receivers. And this one got me. Chargers have yet to give up 21 points in a game this season. They have held every other offense to under 20 or less. They gave up 20 to the Steelers. Every other team's been 17 or less other than that. So this defense is good, and they like to run the ball. So, yeah, I'm just not trusting Calvin Ridley right now.
Yeah, after last week, like, why would you? Right? Like, feels like Deontay Johnson 2.0 a little bit, but you definitely do not have as much confidence as you did with Deontay on, with Andy Dalton as his quarterback or something like that. So I'm totally cool staying away from Calvin Ridley.
For sure. All right, before our tight end starts and sits real quick, just remember, join the Discord. 4,500 over there. Start sit advice, waiver wire advice, trade advice, props thrown in there. Free weekly rankings will come out right after you're listening to this. If you're listening on Thursday before the game, so there's no reason not to join. Really, there isn't a reason. So click that link in the description of the audio podcast or video that you're listening to. All right, Ty, let's zoom through these tight ends because we know everybody's been waiting for this moment. They've been waiting the entire episode. Some have skipped ahead to this part. So I'll let you start with your tight end start.
The guy that has just been going nuts lately. It's Mike Gesicki. You may have thought I was leading into I was going to say, you may have thought I was leading into Cade Otton. At this point, it's kind of an obvious start to play Cade Otton, right? But Mike Gesicki has come through big time whenever T. Higgins has missed game time. He averages 15 fantasy points without T. Higgins, 3 games with 12 or more as well. And for a tight end to give you 12 or more is huge. T. Higgins is doubtful for Thursday. That was tweeted out Wednesday afternoon. So some of us T. Higgins managers are reeling a bit because the dude has been great when he's healthy. He just keeps missing games. Fire up Mike Gesicki this week because the guy comes through without T. Higgins. He kind of takes over as the wide receiver 2 when T. Higgins misses game time. I saw a tweet as well. Mike Gesicki, in games without T. Higgins, has more air yards and receiving yards than Jamar Chase, which is absurd.
That is ridiculous.
Which is absurd. So, yeah, you may look at like the tight end stats, right? The Cincinnati Bengals tight end stats and be like, Baltimore Ravens, and be like, they kind of shut down tight ends. Well, Mike Gesicki is not really like a traditional tight end in this offense. So fire up Mike Gesicki this week.
No, I mean, that's what it is. If you don't have really like one of the top 4 tight ends right now, you're just chasing volume. And Mike Gesicki, like you said, no T. Higgins is a good guy to chase volume on. And I have our 5th player now from the Jaguars and Minnesota Vikings. And like you all thought, Brenton Strange is my starter. I'm just kidding. Evan Engram, my start of the week. He saw 10 targets last week with no Christian Kirk. We saw him put up 140 targets last year with Christian Kirk missing most of the season. You're just chasing volume. And that's what it is here. We talk about Vikings pass defense isn't that great. I'm firing up Evan Engram everywhere I got him, which is actually nowhere right now. But you should fire up Evan Engram if you have him on your fantasy team, because I think he's going to be for sure a great start this week.
Yeah, there was there was some reports that Trevor Lawrence is a bit banged up right now, that he's really going to be a day-to-day kind of practice candidate this week. If he plays, Evan Engram, you can expect the normal with Evan Engram then. But if it's the backup that plays, I think it's CJ Beathard, since I just signed him off of a team's practice squad. I think you could still play Evan Engram, but you do just kind of lower expectations. Yeah. But either way, you're playing Evan Engram.
For sure. All righty. Best part. Tight end sits. So take it away, Ty.
I always go with the low-hanging fruit when it comes to these tight end sits, but I'm saying Dallas Goedert. He finally returned to practice. So I wouldn't be surprised if he plays on Sunday because he's missed the last 3. And if you were to miss 4, it's like, well, then why didn't you just put the guy on IR at that point? But at the same time, he could miss it because this matchup against Dallas is just not a usual Philly versus Dallas matchup game. AJ Brown doesn't play. Maybe Devontae Smith was also a DMP on Wednesday practice, so maybe. But I think it's just about to be a massive Saquon game.
Yep. No, and I don't see any reason it shouldn't. I'm gonna go with Sam Laporta here, and I'm gonna say, you know what? Put yourself out of the misery. Stop hoping that it's going to get better because it's not against Houston. They've been the best team against fantasy tight ends so far, giving up 5.9 fantasy points. Since his bye, he has 1 game with over 3 targets. And now you get Jameson Williams coming back. I just don't see any reason to have him in your starting lineup. He just hasn't given you that, just anything to be excited about this year. Right now, in points per game, can you guess where Sam Laporta is in points per game among tight ends? 20. Averaging 8
boy.
Points per game. Behind Jonnu Smith, Mike Gesicki, Zach Ertz, Taysom Hill, Hunter Henry, Cole Kmet, Tucker Kraft, David Njoku, K-Dot. I left out a couple names in there, but just ridiculous how poor he's been this season. Maybe one of the biggest fantasy busts we've had this year that hasn't been because of injury.
Yeah.
Alrighty. Oh, what were you saying?
I was just going to say, your hope for some of these sits would be that it would be a high scoring game or something, which you can make that argument for Detroit and Houston this week. But Laporta has shown that he doesn't really produce in high scoring games.
I know.
So
Lions have plenty of them.
Right. Exactly. There is not going to say there's, you may have to play Laporta just on the chance that he reels in a 52-yard, hook and ladder play or something. Right. But I would, if Mike Gesicki is on your waivers and you've got Laporta, I'm going and grabbing Gesicki and playing him over
100%. Lions over their last 5 games have scored 42, 47, 31, 52, and 24. And Gesicki's been terrible. So, he's had 1 game. So, or not Gesicki, Laporta, excuse me. He's been not great. But that wraps it up for us. Hopefully we have helped you on your way to a Week 10 championship. Lucas should hopefully be back with us again next week. If you want to follow us on those social medias, I'm at Camelot FFF on the X, at Tyler_Plath for Tyler. FFL is, if you want to follow the main page, the FFL is on Instagram, Fantasy Football Fellas on TikTok, YouTube, and Facebook. Fantasy Football Fellas shorts on YouTube. Next week, we have, I don't remember what our Monday or our Tuesday episode is. We have our last trade targets episode on Wednesday, and then 24 starts and sits on Thursday. So make sure you're following along. Ty, what do we got on Tuesday? What's the episode?
We got easiest rest of season schedules.
Ooh. All right, we're lighting it up, showing you guys who you should be targeting in that last week before most of your trade deadlines close. So do not miss it next week. But that is all from us today. Let's go win Week 10. Deuces.